Richard, are you ready to go? Where is he? Not yet. Okay, good. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, very nice. We had a little bit of a computer glitch.
Well, that's mine. That's always the problem. They wanted me to put it on the disc. I said, well, on the thumb drive, and move it to theirs. I said, well, it's not going to work. None of my audio is working.
Exactly.
So, Rich, sorry. You're going to want to.
No, I'll be right here.
Okay, we're going to get started now with Mr. Richard Dolan, who I've known for a number of years, who is actually the publisher of the book that I've just released, UFOs, Area 51 and Government Informants. My first encounter, I should maybe tell the story, my first encounter, I was at the Center for UFO Studies. I had run across Richard Dolan's book. Richard doesn't even know the story. I had this book, and I was at the Center for UFO Studies, and I said, have you seen this new book, man? I'm in the index of his book, and I'm looking at all the presidents. He's got this president's story, this president. I'm going, man, this is the most amazing thing. He said, no, this is terrible. Like, what's this guy? And you new guy. And they had no interest in this book whatsoever. And now he's one of the main historians, the main guys who everybody looks up to get the information. But when he first started, I remember the reaction. It was like, get out of here with this stupid book. And I thought, you got to read this book. It's really good. So anyway, here's Richard, and I'm honored to be a friend of his and to be able to introduce him this evening.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you. That was great.
Wow, I'd never heard that story, Grant. They still don't like me, so it's all good. Yeah, I get love from certain portions of this research community, and no love from a few select portions, and that is one of them. Well, look, if you really want to go through life without, having anyone say any bad things about you, then here's my advice: don't do anything, don't aspire to anything, and don't be anything, and then no one will criticize you. So we had a little bit of a computer snafu earlier, but everything's good. So I think we'll be fine. So I'll just be signaling for you to advance the slide, just the arrow key, that should do it. It's very nice to be here. I'm supposed to go till 6 a.m. I believe that was the word that was put out earlier, so if you've got some coffee, we'll be good. Yeah, okay. It won't be that late. I might take a slight liberty with the 50-minute idea. I might go like a little longer. If it goes too long, you can leave. I wouldn't blame you. So I wanted to do a disclosure type of theme for this lecture. That's what this is about, citizen hearing for disclosure. And as some of you know, I do write history, but I've also tried for many years to be as creative a thinker in this field as I can be. And that means looking at this in as fresh a way as I can, asking original questions. And one of those questions a couple of years ago was, not will we have disclosure? Will there be an end to the truth embargo? But if it happens, what next? How will it actually change our world? Because what I'd noticed for years is that people love to talk about disclosure, and basically it was either nothing, like no vision as to what it would be like, or some kind of utopia where we make the deserts bloom and all problems in the world end. And I just thought somehow that there's got to be more to it than that. So I actually co-authored a book a couple of years ago about this called AD, After Disclosure, get it? And it was sort of our grounded speculation on what the world would be like. I'll talk a little bit about that and a lot of other things. So could you hit the slide, please? I want to go back in time a little bit, and because I don't really think we can truly appreciate disclosure until we understand the depths of the secrecy itself. Grant Cameron did a fantastic job in his last lecture in talking a lot about the cover-up and the lies and the depths of those lies. I'm going to be covering a little bit of that myself, maybe in my own way. But, so let's go back to the post-World War II era, and I don't want to go through the whole argument about why UFOs are real. I'm not really interested in doing that here in this conference. I think we're all on that page. So let's assume something like Roswell happened. There was a crash. There was a recovery of some kind of exotic technology that was not manufactured by our civilization. In the words of what came to me actually through a very, very, very high-level scientist connected with the intelligence community, he had heard that one of the key words used was not made by human hands. Technology not made by human hands. So let's just say that happened. So you are, you might be the president, Harry Truman. There's a Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, who ended his life with a 16-floor bungee jump out of, sorry, that didn't sound nice, out of the Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was certainly murdered, not suicide. To this day, the official conclusion, it was a suicide. It's not true. So just go back there and let's look at that situation. Next slide, please. So you've got this artifact. These artifacts is technology that's from somewhere else. It's incomprehensible. Hit the next button there. So this is a clip from the end of World War II. Homeless people, millions of people who did not have a home, millions on the brink of starvation. Next slide, please. We have the atomic bomb that had just been detonated. It created a completely new world, right? Next slide. And right, the birth of the Cold War. So all of these things, it was a world that, yes, there was a great sigh of relief that the Germans, the Nazis had been defeated, the Japanese Empire had been defeated, but now we have all of these new problems, these new issues. And you've got this new thing now on your plate, these objects, these flying saucers, these maybe alien beings with incredible technology. Do you decide to tell the world about it? Next slide, please. You have another problem. You have the problem of oil. Look, the thing is, even a 10-year-old child can tell by looking at one of these flying saucers that they're not using gasoline to go around the block. They're using something better, whatever that better is, whether now we talk about zero-point energy or maybe nuclear fusion. There's maybe other even very exotic things out there. But whatever those things are, implicit in their energy solution is something that does not have to do with petroleum. And that's a bad thing in 1947, because petroleum was the boom industry of the world. Next, hit a couple in a row there. These are just pictures of the oil industry. Keep going. There were lots of jobs. Keep going. And one more. And that leads to the car industry, because it's the way it is today. Every single thing is dependent on petroleum. If we were to get off of oil, let's say there's a free energy solution to all of this, which there very well may be, there's a lot of jobs tied up in the oil industry. Back in the 50s, it was generating 5–10% growth every year in that industry alone. It was the engine for the world economy, the automotive industry as well. Next, please. And then you've got these. Hit another one. And again, a couple more. Just keep going. Okay, so implicit here is something radically different. So next. And then you've got the whole idea of social control. Maybe the people in this room, if there was a disclosure announcement, might not panic. You might take it kind of calmly. I bet not all of us would, even all of us who've probably been thinking about this a lot. I don't know how calm I would be, to be honest with you. And then, you've got family, you've got relatives. I've got relatives. I can tell you for sure, not all of them would be very good with this information. Do people kind of lose it when the going gets tough? Yes, many people do. And we really have no idea how bad panic might be. Next. And here's a statement. This is from Air Force Captain Edward Ruppelt back in the early 50s when he was running Project Blue Book. He was talking to U.S. Marine Corps Major Donald Kehoe, who was one of the early researchers on all of this. And Ruppelt said, "How could we convince the public the aliens weren't hostile when we didn't know it ourselves?" So all of these reasons. You're Harry Truman and you've got this information. Do you really tell the world about this awesome reality until you get some information about it yourself? You really can't. Because if you give up if you tell them you've got this technology, then it becomes very difficult not to share it with the rest of the world, in particular with the Soviet Union, which you don't want to do. You didn't want to share atomic technology in 1947. You're certainly not going to want to share something as nifty as alien technology. Next. And there's just too many unanswered questions at that point. So, and then you got nonstop military encounters. Even by the late 1940s, this was already happening. Aircraft, fighter pilots and other military personnel, not just ordinary civilians, were encountering UFOs. We have memos dealing with this as early as there's the Foo Fighters from World War II, which certainly were part of the picture. And we have a memo from Air Force General Nathan Twining, who became a 4-star general, is very famous, I'm sure many of you know, in which he describes, in response to a letter by another general, who basically wanted to know, is there anything we need to do about these UFO, these flying saucers? Is this something that we're making? Twining essentially says no, and then describes, point by point, a number of the key characteristics of these saucers. Silent, evasive upon sighted, great acceleration and speeds. And then, of course, my favorite line is, he says, typically domed on, round on top and flat on bottom. And ask yourself, what in 1947 would have that type of a shape? Next, please. Yeah, I wrote an article a few years ago, which I think is a useful, if anyone's really a skeptic who wants to have a pretty good argument on why this is taken seriously, I would encourage you to go to my website at keyholepublishing.com. This is an article I wrote, 12 government documents that take UFOs seriously. I've got JPEG images of the documents themselves, plus my own analysis of them. And it's a good, short kind of, I think, 3,000-word piece. You can get through it pretty quickly. And I think it gives a very good presentation as to some of the good evidence in terms of declassified literature that I think an intelligent skeptic would want to go to. Next. And again, please. So with all of that going on, I think it's easy to see why you'd need secrecy, right? You couldn't just tell the world right away. Now, if you had the best intentions, you might get your people together and say, all right, let's figure out our game plan. We will consider telling the world maybe in a couple of years at some point, but we need information. So, but now you've got these artifacts to study, and that's going to be expensive. So how do you pay for that? Well, you can't really just tell Congress, we want some money set aside to study this ET technology, so you have to hide it. So you have to create a black budget. I've argued for years that students of the black budget, and I don't even know how many of them there are in our university system anyway, but I don't really think they have any true appreciation of just how important the UFO phenomenon is in the history of black budget America. I believe that it's not the only component, obviously, at the beginning, but I think it's an important component at the beginning. You have to go black, as it were, if you're going to study this quietly right from the beginning. It's expensive. One particular, I hate to talk about like secret sources that I have, but one particular individual I have who has a good deal of experience with this just said to me as a way of insight, it's very expensive, this type of program to study this technology, but he said the security is actually more expensive by a factor of 7 or 8 over the scientific R&D. In other words, and he didn't go into details about security, but I assume it's more than just guys with guns. There's got to be a built infrastructure, maybe underground. There's got to be money as well to manage the public, to manage academic world, media, political world. I think a lot of money passes through the system to keep everything nice and quiet and contained. And you have layers of secrecy. So if you're part of the ET program, let's just say, that's a program that would be nested within other programs. So you might leave house, say goodbye to your spouse, and you go to work and you check in, and let's say it's with the Navy. But then through the Navy, you've been recruited into another black program, so you check into that one. But then through that black program, then maybe you're in something related to this. So it's layers and layers. And this is, again, something that's been studied and commented on, and this is in the academic literature to some extent. So you have to have control. You need to control your mainstream media, the radio, newspapers. And we know that this has all been done through, in other areas, CIA's had very close relationships for years and years with all major media. Famously, what was it, CIA director? I think it was it not Helms? It was Colby, I believe, the one who drowned in the Potomac River. Remember that, about 15 years ago? Who said, all media is really under our thumb. We've got them all. You have to control the academic and scientific community. It's really not as hard as people would say. I think the academic community has a very, very unrealistic notion sometimes, at least I get the idea, of how independent it really is. Everything's dependent on grant money, first of all. So you've got to do that. And everything's dependent on getting tenure. I mean, hell, when I was living that dream, thinking I wanted to teach in the university, you couldn't even talk about the JFK assassination in a truly open, candid way. I mean, something that prosaic, relatively speaking. UFOs, it's impossible. But I think that the way that it works is that you have a few guard dogs, as it were, placed in the system. Back in the 1950s, one of the top ones was Donald Menzel, Harvard astronomer. You know, who's going to mug Donald Menzel in the academic world? The answer is nobody. So Menzel was the world's leading debunker of UFOs, and turns out he was very high level with NSA, a thing he bragged to President-elect John F. Kennedy about, trying to ingratiate himself with Kennedy when he got elected. No one knew about Menzel's connection to the NSA, not even his wife, apparently. Stanton Friedman found it when he was going through the Menzel archives at Harvard University. The point is, none of this proves that Menzel was working for the man, as it were, but I mean, everything lines up. He had the connections to the highest level classified world, and here he is writing the most ridiculously bad, I mean, really, truly intellectually insulting debunkings of UFO phenomenon, utterly unworthy of a man of his intellectual stature. But so the point is, if some community college professor got interested in UFOs, there's Donald Menzel to smack him down. And I think this works within the media. It works within all established disciplines, where most people are not going to be heroes. They're not going to be Superman. They'll just go out and they want to do their job, and they don't want to make the waves anyway. And they don't really have the stomach or the ability to fight certain battles. We all know this. And then the other reason you need secrecy is you've got to have, you need a way to study this technology and all of the implications of what you're dealing with. And you can't do that with everyone looking over your shoulder. I mean, realistically. I can understand their situation. I mean, I'm not on their side, but I can understand why they would feel a need to hide all of what they do from the rest of us. Next slide, please. So I often think of secrecy as a big iceberg where all the action, most of the action is below the water. In terms of the information we have been able to get from our government on UFOs, or really probably a lot of things, most of the stuff that we have is just above the water. So you have public open sources at the top. Then you have sources that were once classified but are now declassified, so they're available for you. Then you have at the level is a classification called unclassified, which they're technically legal for you to get, but they're really hard to find, and you've got to be very, very good at obtaining them. And then you've got below the water, there's different levels. There's confidential and secret, then top secret, and then you've got a variety of compartmented types of top secret SCI, and you got, and a lot of these are kind of mixed together because a lot of them would be within special access programs and unacknowledged special access programs, which don't exist except that they do exist, and waived, which means that they're waived from any kind of oversight, and so on. And then you go down to the private contractors and cliques, and what you find is that most of the black budget special access programs, or at least many of them, seem to be dominated, as far as we can tell, by private contractors much more than DoD personnel. And then at the bottom of the iceberg would be them, whoever they happen to be, these other beings. Let's not forget them. They're certainly not announcing themselves openly to us. Next slide, please. So here's a question I would ask you, something I've kicked around for a number of years now. And I'm now hearing this phrase. Alex Jones just used my phrase, breakaway civilization, just the other day. Richard Hoagland kind of tried to take it as his own for a little while, and I think he's backed away. But here's an idea. So what happens when, let's say we are all part of a secret research team. We're a black budget team, and we're studying Roswell technology, or maybe the Aztec UFO crash, or some other thing. And everyone here's got like a genius IQ, and we got a lot of money and lots of time to work on this project, many, many years, and total secrecy within which to do it. So maybe after a while we might have a couple of eureka moments where we can have great ideas, maybe ways of improving fiber optics or integrated circuits or solid-state electronics, money makers. So that would be great for us and for everyone who's paying for us, because you're inventing the future. You've got it right there. And suddenly the incentive for giving this secret up goes down to less than zero. But what happens if you have other breakthroughs that are even better than this? Just let's play a little what if here. So what if someone discovers the proper source of energy for some of these objects and it's not petroleum? So what if someone discovers some version of free energy, or masters electrogravitics, right? So I would think that at that point our bosses, the guys who pay our paychecks, would say, okay, that's very good. That's not going anywhere, but we'll keep working on it. Because clearly that type of a breakthrough would be truly revolutionary and would threaten the world's largest industry, petroleum, and would threaten the entire infrastructure of the world, which is based upon petroleum. Jobs and all of these subsidiary industries which rely on it. I mean, going off of petroleum, I liken it to operating on a human being, and your job as a surgeon is to completely give them a new, a circulation system, let's say. So you have to take out all the veins and arteries and capillaries, and you're going to put in a new system, but you can't kill them in the process. Because really our whole infrastructure, everything is dependent on this. And getting off of it, even under the easiest circumstances, is never going to be easy. So I think what would happen is we would continue working on this wicked, awesome, cool technology, and we'd develop our own flying saucers. Why wouldn't we? At some point, I think electrogravitics has been mastered. That's my own opinion. And if that's the case, then it really gets crazy, because we could build our own craft, but we wouldn't be able to share, we wouldn't be able to let the rest of the world know we have the craft. Because if we do that, then boom, there goes everything. So what would we use the craft for? Well, my guess is we would probably use them under highly classified conditions, and those conditions would be to deal with these other beings. That's what I think. And you could use it to explore. You go around the solar system, which in fact are what a number of fairly credible, believe it or not, leaks have indicated. And before you know it, we would almost be like a totally separate society. I mean, what is it that makes a civilization unique anyway? It's hard to quantify, but I think certainly level of technology is one thing that distinguishes a civilization. Another would be its worldview or its cosmology. In both of those cases, we'd be totally different from our friends and family outside of our community. We might have a totally different manner of social interaction. We would certainly see ourselves as very different. In a sense, you could say, arguably, that we would be a separate civilization, one that is broken away from the other one, hence a breakaway civilization. Next slide. And that's really the basic idea. And I don't know how far they've gone with this. I don't know how advanced their technology is. I will tell you, I had a very interesting conversation a number of years ago with a former scientist with NSA. He was a private contractor, a private employee of the NSA, not military. Extremely brilliant, and said to me that circa 1964-65, the NSA had computers with clock speeds of 650 megahertz. And today we would laugh at that. But of course, in 1965, no one had personal computers, and the computing world did not achieve that clock speed in the consumer market until around the year 2000, 35 years later. 35 years. So the NSA, you could say, was 35 years ahead of the rest of the world on that metric in computer technology. That's not too shabby. And I've remembered saying to him, too, well, holy smokes. I mean, I remember watching the movie Apollo 13, and remember when they were stuck out in space and all these guys using slide rules to get them back. And I said, I'd be kind of annoyed if I were one of those astronauts. And he said, well, look, I understand that, but you have to realize that computer was way more important than even the lives of the astronauts. We could not share that. It was way too sensitive. And that was their attitude. And the other thing about NSA is that it wasn't really publicly known to exist until 1964. That was the first book. The first book that ever appeared that talked about the NSA was called Invisible Government by David Wise and Thomas Ross. It came out that year, 64. So here's the thing. The NSA was a secret organization that had probably the best computer in the world in the early 60s. That's something to ponder. Anyway, so back onto a breakaway civilization. My basic concept of it is that it's almost like an invisible empire. Better technology than you and me, able, because of what they have, to explore areas of our world unavailable to the rest of us. I'm thinking Earth orbit and beyond. Is there a base on the far side of the moon? Crazy as it sounds, could be. There's some very good, interesting leaks that have indicated as such. And if that's the case, then clearly they've got something much, much better than what the rest of us know about. Possible interactions or encounters with non-human intelligences? I would think so. Certainly deeper science and cosmology, and off the grid in many, many, many ways. Doesn't mean that they all necessarily live on Mars in an alternative 3 scenario, by the way. I mean, I've always felt the action is on Earth. They're probably here. They have family. I can imagine that they're here, but that type of society, I should think, is probably very stressful, I would think, in a lot of ways. Next slide, please. Now, if you think that the whole idea of a breakaway civilization is a little too out there for you, okay, fair enough. But forgetting UFOs, forgetting all the crazy conspiracy things that I like to talk about much of the time, just on a purely prosaic matter, I would think that everyone in this room is probably past the 6th grade civics class version of government in which we're told, here's how it works. Okay, I elect my member of Congress, and then we elect the president, and we have checks and balances. And if you don't like your guy, you throw the bumps out and get a new one. And that's how it works. So that's really, of course, not how it works. So who's in control? Is it the president, or, next, please, or the guy who puts him into the White House? That's David Rockefeller, who I believe is 138 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, I think once a week he gets the blood of a young child to keep young, which is always a good thing. No, I don't know. He might be 90. I think David Rockefeller is 96, if I'm not mistaken. And he's probably no longer, but it is absolutely true that he was directly responsible for a number of these people becoming president. Jimmy Carter famously. David Rockefeller, when Ronald Reagan ran in 1980, he tried to sound like what Ron Paul, basically, and he campaigned against the Trilateral Commission, the insiders, and all that. Of course, what happened was Bill Casey was his campaign manager, who was a Rockefeller man right from the get-go. And then, of course, when Reagan was campaigning in the primaries, he didn't just single out Jimmy Carter, he singled out George Bush. He said, I'm not like those insiders. And he said, George Bush will never be on my administration. And then, of course, when he has Bush as his running mate, famously, a couple of longtime Reagan supporters walked right off the stage at the Republican convention. So Reagan signed on. And, in fact, he had a very nice meeting with David Rockefeller. I think it was in September 1980 when he was still a candidate. Anyway, I think it's Rockefeller and then, Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who are his guys. And I think the word was always, One of them runs the Republican Party, the other runs the Democrat Party, which I think was probably true for a long time, and who knows if it's still true, or now their successors. Point is, it's money, it's always been money, we all know it, that's really running the show. And what does a president do? How much can a president really rule? A president has to kiss babies, he's got to shake the hands, he's got to get on TV. How many black budget programs is he really going to know about or run? Probably none. Next slide. And, you know, unless you think that this is not accurate, I would encourage you to read this book, John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he talks about how powerful private financial groups make it their business to rob entire nations of their treasury through fraud. It's a very interesting book. He knows about it because he used to do it. Next slide. Oh, yes, right. I was talking about black budgets earlier and how very few studies have been done on them, and that's really true. And you'd think on something as important as black budgets, we really need to shed more light. But of course, the problem is, that's why they're called black budgets, because you can't see anything. There's only been a couple of public studies of the black budget. One was done over a decade ago by Bill Sweetman, who wasn't an economist. He's an aviation aerospace guy. Doesn't write about UFOs, but I'm sure I'd love to talk with him about them. I'm sure he has some opinions. He did some research on black budget, special access programs back at the very end of the Clinton years. And his estimate is that there were about 150 of them. That seems low, but his basic assessment was that there didn't seem to be a whole lot of oversight. Many were unacknowledged, that is, you know, they weren't supposed to exist, but they did. He noted that they had separate, almost independent classification systems. So in other words, a project manager of one black budget program would basically create his or her own classification system, dominated by private contractors, and he had no idea how they got all their money. It was opaque to him. A couple of years ago, of course, in the Washington Post, Dana Priest and Bill Arkin did their series called Top Secret America, which for a mainstream, you know, corporate media type of publication was pretty good. They came to the same type of conclusion. They said, we cannot tell how large and unwieldy and expensive the United States intelligence community is. It is almost impossible to get a true handle on it, except it is out of control. It's massively privatized, which is what Sweetman had said. We don't even know if it's making the country safer. Their implication is that it probably wasn't. Next slide. So there's all of that, and then there's this. You know, you turn on your TV. I drove down here from upstate New York to come here, and as I was approaching D.C., I turned on the radio. Just, you know, I was bored. So I was curious, actually. I don't listen to a lot of radio. And it was like commercial, loud commercial, some dumb American talking about sports, and then another dumb American talking about the most ridiculous political BS that, you know, I mean, just stupid stuff. Then a country station, and then like you know, pop station, Lady Gaga type thing. I finally found Tracy Chapman at the end, and I was happy. After like 20 stations, that's how it felt. What? It's what's that? 88.5 on the left side. Maybe that's what it was. Probably. Yeah. So, I mean, our culture is just, has it gotten worse? I think it's gotten worse. Judge Judy, Fox News, all this garbage, Dancing with the Stars. So what is it? It's a total disconnect between the reality and what is being shoved into our heads, really 24/7. And really, when you think about it, with the situation, the actual reality of our world, you wonder, do they feel that they must lie, they must distract us, they must keep us as completely mindless and numbed as possible, because that just makes it easier for everyone. And I really think that's their conclusion. Next, please. Yeah, so the message, just sit down and shut up and don't Don't do a thing. Next. That's what American citizens become, maybe? Just don't make waves? And actually, okay, so we have our political culture, and we're told we're going to be good citizens and vote. But of course, really, how do most of us spend most of our days? We work for companies, we work for organizations, and that's what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to sit down and shut up and basically sell our body, mind, and soul to whatever employer who employs us. That's how it is. No matter how much freedom we want in our political life, we still basically, don't we, spend most of our lives, most of us, following someone else's orders anyway. So, you know, I'd like to think we can, in our own way, become truth warriors. And warrior is the right word, because you got to fight for it. You got to fight for the right to party, and you got to fight for the right to get truth. Next, please. One of the issues that this field of ours, this fringe field of UFO research, has to continually monitor itself is how do we know the things that we know? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but simply the problem that we have is we're sort of consigned to this little lunatic fringe thing here, and we're not getting the information that we want to get from our government, because a lot of it is not available. So we're sort of groping around in the dark as it is, and then into that void, in addition to reputable, responsible people, will often step people who are not responsible and are not reputable, and will do anything they want to make a quick buck off of this field, and there are people who do it. And on top of that, there has been a history of at least occasional, maybe regular disinformation that has been pushed into this field to muddy up the waters. So it's very difficult to know what we know. And that's just a slide to help us to remind ourselves to be careful and cautious at times in our conclusions. Next slide. With all of the difficulties involved in all of this, the classified nature of this topic and so on, I continue to believe that the disclosure of this reality is an inevitability. As difficult or even as impossible as it may seem, it will happen. The world is not going to stop at 2013. I mean, my goodness, the world of 1993, only 20 years ago, was so radically different from what we're living in now, to say nothing of 1973, 1953. We're now so connected. I have a friend who's living in Beijing, China. I'm sure many of you do. Who would have thought that a couple of years ago, right? You can talk with people on Skype anywhere in the world. We can share information. This is a completely new situation now. So, you know, we're a couple of years away from computers that will literally challenge and then eventually surpass human intellect in many ways. Next slide. And this is a slide that basically speaks to that. Where are we going to be? About a decade or more ago, I got really turned on to the future of artificial intelligence, read some books by Ray Kurzweil, who I think is a real visionary. He was the one who really started me thinking along these lines. He wrote a book about 15 years ago called The Age of Spiritual Machines, which really grabbed hold of my imagination. And, but not just him, many other AI people, and they're fairly mainstream. They're not like us. They actually get funding to do the things they do, and they all say the same thing with variation, which is essentially within about 20 years from now, your computer will be telling you it's a conscious sentient being, and you will very likely believe those claims. Now, will it be conscious the way that you are? No, probably not, but will it matter? It'll seem like it. It won't need to sleep. It won't need coffee in the morning. It'll have a relative IQ of 500, and hey, as Kurzweil put it, it'll have a godlike level of intelligence. And in that situation, ask yourself this. If you have a question you want to ask of your super intelligent computer, let us name it Marvin, let us just say, you could say, hey, Marvin, I've been thinking about all of this UFO stuff. I wonder if you can just tell me what you know. And Marvin will say, whatever Marvin comes up with, but Marvin will probably say that it's real and there's something going on. And what is that line? I think by Schopenhauer. 3 stages of accepting new truths. Stage 1, it's attacked violent. No, it's ridiculed. Stage 1 is ridicule. Stage 2, it's attacked violently. Stage 3, they say, yeah, we knew it all along. Next slide, please. This is from, remember the Arab Spring? I kept some of those. I'm still a fan of that. I know it didn't turn out the way we wanted, but you still don't rule it out. Don't rule it out. I think the Arab Spring was a tremor, just like the Occupy movement is a tremor. What I'm pointing out here is that rapid change is the rule, not the exception. Think of the French Revolution. That was rather quick, actually. 1 year, the French peasantry is grinding away in poverty. A couple of years later, the king and queen there goes their head, and the church has been expropriated, and wow, it's a new calendar, everything. Russian Revolution, quick. The fall of the Soviet bloc in 1989, 1990, 1991. I was in Berlin during the period that the wall came down. It was a very exciting time for me. I got to experience that. It was electrifying. And all of that was unpredicted, even 6 months ahead of schedule. No one was really thinking that would happen. So rapid, dramatic change, I would say count on it, but the problem is you can't predict it easily. But I think that we are going to see rapid change relating to this particular topic. Next slide. And again, the next slide. So will there be a UFO ET firestorm? Yes, I think. Again, imagine being the president having to announce this reality. How would it happen first? There's a couple of possibilities, and I don't really know how it will happen, but I've just put some of these out there for you. One could be through a series of inside leaks. I missed a part of Grant's lecture, his excellent lecture, but so I don't know if he discussed this. I know he has written quite a bit, probably more than anyone else that I know, about inside machinations of various presidential administrations relating to the possibility of disclosing the reality of UFOs. What we know is that almost every administration has its own abortive disclosure story, where it looked like it might happen, but then suddenly it doesn't happen. So the point, and I also spoke to a gentleman, high-level retired CIA, said to me, this is a man who briefed former US presidents, said to me that this topic, the disclosure topic, comes up every like 5 years or so. Like someone raises it. In other words, the question being, how do we handle this? I mean, is it time for us to consider releasing information so that this gets out to the public? And interestingly, maybe not surprisingly to you, one of the big obstacles that some of these groups have discovered, in other words, these groups and subcommittees and different people working on different aspects of the problem. One of the problems is lawsuits. I mean, something as prosaic as that, and not just simply citizen class action suits, which is an issue, but corporate lawsuits. So if I'm one defense contractor and I find out that my competitor for years had access to highly exotic technology, that's a violation of certain trade practice, of fair trade, and I might sue. And this one gentleman said to me that he was on a subcommittee, and that was one of the things that they looked into. And they said that alone was a daunting prospect that no one really wanted to deal with. But nonetheless, there are constantly quiet discussions. I don't want to say constant. There are periodic quiet discussions that seem to be taking place on this, and you never know. So there could be a leak. And by the way, we're now in the era of WikiLeaks. That didn't exist 10 years ago. Next slide. And there we go. And in fact, yes, WikiLeaks I referred to. WikiLeaks cables did help to spark the Arab Spring, turned out. Basically, a lot of the U.S. diplomatic cables talking about the gross corruption of the Tunisian government got a lot of people angry, and that helped spark things. Next, please. One of the things that I've often believed could spark a disclosure event would just be a major event or sighting. And I realize we've had major events, we've had sightings for years, but we're in a different era now. I mean, I've got my little iPhone, and you got yours, your Droid or your iPhone, with good video. There are new versions coming out all the time. Will there be a version of a phone that has infrared or IR or something like that? It seems to me that we're getting close to a point where there could be a multiply recorded mass sighting that that might, just like they say in baseball, hit the sweet spot and send that ball out of the park. I think it's a possibility. And now, next slide. The problem with my theory on that is this right here. That's a really cool looking video over London. It's a complete hoax. That was from 2011. We're in a harder and harder situation where, I mean, yes, if you want to look for UFO videos on YouTube, there are hundreds of them every year. There's hundreds of new ones. I think many are legit. Most are totally uninvestigated, no follow-up, and several are hoaxes. And so there's not a whole lot of confidence. A YouTube video, as nice as it might be and as fun as it is to look at, is worthless evidence unless there's an independent investigation of it. So that's the key. But I do believe that it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time. I think one thing that we have to have faith in is the rapidity and dramatic nature of the change of the current society that we're in. There has never been any society that's had the kind of rate of change that we're going through right now. And we kind of forget sometimes because today feels like yesterday and tomorrow is going to feel like today. But when you go through a couple of years and look back, you can see. We all can. Next slide. So, all right, so let's say that something happens and it forces the president to make a statement. In my book, AD After Disclosure, my co-author and I hypothesized that it would be a major sighting over Montreal. Why Montreal? We almost threw a dart on the map of the globe. With, Montreal, why not? It's a good city. I have nothing against Montreal. So if there's a sighting there or a sighting somewhere else that cannot be denied, at a certain point it could get some traction, right? So now you got to make your statement. And this is not the easiest thing to do. First thing, damage control and spin control. This is key. And then certainly stalling as long as you can before you need to say what you need to say. Because after some of the things that I've just been describing, next slide. There's going to be a lot of difficult questions. That's why. President says, well, apparently some UFOs are actually not from our civilization. If you were at the panel yesterday, I think I made a joke. I said I wouldn't want to be the president if I had to make that statement, because what I'd want to do is, yes, some UFOs apparently are real. I'm going on vacation. I'll see you all in 6 months. That's what he'd want to do, because there's a lot of very uncomfortable questions. First of all, you have to deal with the people who are just going into panic mode. Are we safe? Who are these other beings? Be a lot of that. But then there's the political blowback. And this, to me, is probably worse than anything else, which is people will want to know, how the hell have you been able to lie to us for all of these years? What does that say about the nature of the undermining of the institutions that we had supposed to trust in? Media, political, Congress, the universities. Have they all been undermined? And the answer is yes. They've all been undermined. They've all been completely subverted and dominated. And look, people are not just going to sit around on this one and say, okay, well, whatever you say, so I'm going to wear my yellow ribbon and support my, your effort. I don't think it's going to happen this time. Now, maybe it will. Maybe people will be just so cowed, so zombified, on their pharmaceuticals and their horrible American food, that they'll just sit around and they'll watch everything on the TV like everyone did in Boston the other week. Really, okay? So maybe they'll just do that, and they'll say, yes, shove that, shove that interpretation of yours into any orifice you want. I'll just take it, like a good American. But I think a lot of people will not take it. And there's going to be a lot of angry people. And there will be some journalists who realize that they're going to become heroes, and they're going to dig into this. And they'll have the ability, and they're going to get some answers. So all of these questions, this is going to be a very difficult thing. And then, of course, the bottom line, what is the status of our secret technology? Of course someone's going to ask that question. It's just a matter of filling in one logical, blank after another. They're going to get to that. It'll be all of 15 minutes. And then ultimately people will, as they always do, they're going to say, well, what do we do? And these are hard questions because do you think the president really knows? Even after he gets briefed, do his briefers really know? Maybe they're as confused by aspects of this as we are. Maybe that they've concluded that they're dealing with an intelligence that is vastly beyond anything that they know how to handle, and maybe they don't have the answers, so they may not know what to say. So next slide. Ditto with who are they? Just something as simple as who are we dealing with? Even among UFO researchers who take this seriously, they don't agree. No one really. Are they extraterrestrial? Are they from another dimension? That's become a very popular go-to position. And then there's some others that are maybe less discussed, but they're out there. Are they a lost civilization? Are they intelligent machines in some way? Some of these you can mix and match them and combine them. Are they angelic or demonic, like is the biblical interpretation the accurate one here? Are they time travelers? I will say this, a number of them look perfectly human. There's some very, very odd stories that I've come across of beings. They look like you and me, but they're not like you and me. They've got telepathic capabilities. I'm glad that Grant talked earlier about consciousness being key to all of this. He and I have gone through a very similar evolution in this, I think. I too have come to that conclusion. But one of the key things about this phenomenon is you find when there are interactions, there is an odd telepathic nature to some of these. Here's a real tough question. How will we know post-disclosure who and what these beings really are? Unless the president can put a gray alien right here on the podium next to him, and you can see and shake his hand, and that may not happen. That may not happen. So we're going to be in a similar position of uncertainty and argument and debate that we are now, only it'll be worse. It'll be worse. Next. And how will all that be resolved? And the same thing with their intentions. That's even more of a nightmare. Do they like us? Do they not like us? Do they care? Maybe they don't care about us. What do they want? Do they want our DNA? Well, they seem, at least reports from alleged abduction seem to indicate that they're interested in our DNA. There are some other, much less savory and more unsettling possibilities that have come up in the encounter research, let's say, where they're interested in our bodies and our souls. Maybe not in a demonic way, but hey, who knows how true these are? I don't know. Are they interested in our world in some way? Well, maybe they're interested in preserving our world. That would be nice. Maybe they're interested in using our world. The late remote viewer, Ingo Swann, had the insight that they treated Earth like a supermarket. Let's go to Earth and get some water. That was one thing he came up with. We don't really know, and the question is, how will we know what their intentions are? If they're not necessarily, even if they told us. One of the things that I try to remind other researchers is, even if someone gets what they believe is a truthful ET message, does that really mean it's truthful? If we went back in time only 1,000 years ago to a totally human society, medieval Europe, let's say, all right, ask yourself, really. You find the smartest person in that society, and how much about our society could you tell them? Could you tell them about a laptop computer? Don't think so. You might be able to tell them that the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around, and his head might just like almost explode right there. You might be able to, I don't think you'd be able to tell them about germs. Probably not, or the age of the universe, or, there's only so much that you could probably tell these people without their whole society just collapsing. And that's if you have their best interests at heart. If you really wanted to screw with them, you could convince them that you're some kind of god or angel or whatever, if you want to have some fun. So what I'm saying is that whoever these other beings are might not be able really to, they might not be able to tell us very much, even if they had our interests at heart. So it would be very difficult for us to know things, even with disclosure. Next slide. Oh, and let's not forget the untidiness in the world that will come in the wake of it. What would happen in the Middle East after there's a disclosure announcement, where all the oil is? Suddenly, people will realize this could portend the end of petroleum. And of course, I think we all realize that we have to end petroleum. We hate petroleum, but we love petroleum because we need it, but we hate it. And we also realize that in the long run, the true long run, that petroleum is not going to be a viable source of energy for human civilization to move on to whatever it's supposed to do that's going to be better than this. It's going to have to go away. And implicit in the UFO phenomenon is the end of petroleum as our primary source of energy. I believe this. I think many people do. So will there be massive unrest politically around the world? In the U.S.? Yeah, I think so. They talk about Occupy Wall Street. How about Occupy Area 51? Occupy Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? Do you just think, maybe older people might not do this, but do you think people under 30 might? I think they might. I think they absolutely might. And I think that what you'd be very likely to see would be kind of a 21st century repetition of the 1960s, in the sense of you have certain great cultural shocks occur, and young people are going to realize that all the values that we have been living with all these years are complete BS, and they're not going to accept it, and they're going to say, screw you, and I'm going to take some ayahuasca, and I'm going to have my spiritual journey, I'm going to find the snake people, and I'm out, man. I'm out. And they may also get political. I would hope they get political, and they demand some answers, because really the only way, even after disclosure, that anything good's going to happen is if people mobilize. And then, other truth movements. After all, I think one of the Congress persons yesterday, I'm trying to remember who it was, but he was spot on. He said, all of this UFO stuff is making me wonder, if they're lying on something like this, what else are they lying about? Bingo. Do you think that this will give some impetus to, all right, JFK maybe, that's seeming like it's getting a little old, although it's still relevant, 9/11, not everyone's on board with 9/11. I am, yes. I caught a lot of hell for that, by the way, a decade ago. I think I was the first, at least well-known UFO researcher to go public on my opinion on 9/11. If you don't agree with me, fine, you don't have to, but I'll go to my grave saying that I do not and will not ever believe the official version of events on that. Not ever. Not ever. Not ever. And yeah, good, thank you. Not that I know how it went down. I wasn't part of the club, so I didn't really get all the inside information. But anyway, my point is simply that this disclosure will prompt a lot of effort to investigate other subterranean activities. Chemtrails, maybe, underground bases, who knows. It's all going to come out, and it's all going to be very messy. Next slide, please. So the question is, how easy will it be to get answers? That, I don't know. I have no idea how easy that will be. Should we expect truth from our political leadership? Should we expect the CIA to walk away from the table with disclosure and say, oh, well, yeah, you got us. Okay, let's give you all of our information here. Good luck. No, I don't think so. They've been invested in managing this for an entire human lifetime. I doubt that they're just going to walk away. So they will take the next step. I guarantee there must be contingency plans on this eventuality. And at all times, they're going to need to maintain control of the narrative as it evolves. The one thing you can never, ever have is loss of control over the narrative. And again, I don't want to go all creepy conspiratorial about Boston. I don't know what happened in Boston, but I know this. When that thing happened on Monday, they had to wrap it up by the weekend. There is no way in hell the president could let that go on indefinitely without producing a body. Not a chance. That's a political nightmare. And you're also in danger of losing control of the narrative. You're going to have all these alternative theories come up, and that's unacceptable. So you must produce an answer. Whether that's the real guy, I have not the slightest idea. I honestly don't. They may not care either. They may be going to get their solution, but it'll all be covert. My opinion. Expecting truth? No, I don't think so. So my point about disclosure is I don't expect it's the end of anything. I do expect that it's the beginning of just a new phase. And it's the new phase of fighting for truth, basically, is all it is. It's not going to be handed to us. There'll be this one little truth, yes, it's real, and then it'll be on all of us who care about this to work as independent researchers as responsibly as we can and to continue to fight and hold those public officials accountable in their own narrative, because otherwise it's just going to be completely self-serving. Next. And, disclosure will not happen in a vacuum. It will happen in the context of the issues that will be dominant at that time. So in our own time, I think we can confidently predict that there's still going to be very significant issues in the context of the disclosure. Next slide, please. For example, there's still a situation in the world where this many people own all of this amount of money. In my very first book, I've always been interested in these issues, even long before I got into UFOs. But, I used to study patterns of global wealth and American wealth. And basically, there's about 100 people in this room, let's pretend. So if this were America, if this were the whole country, so one person in this room would have $40. Oh, and if the total number of dollars in the room was $100. So in utopia, if Karl Marx were to, if you want that kind of utopia, to decide everyone would have $1. But in our room, one guy's got $40. Or actually now it's like 45. And then the next person after that one would have $10 or $11. So the top two people own more than half all the money in the room. Kind of nifty for them. The bottom 20 people have 0 or less than 0. And everyone else has got like 25 cents here and there. So that's our country. It's been that way for a long time. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, although in 1970, the top 1% had 20% of all national wealth, so a little bit of a difference. And that does make a difference. Anyway, that's our world. And by the way, in that little room of ours, that nation, there's a political system, there's an economy, there's a media, there's financial, academic institution. Who's going to be in the best position to control all of those for his own benefit and to keep the whole thing going? The question answers itself. When you have elections every 4 years, what questions do you ask? Who owns what? Usually not. Pick some other topic that no one will ever agree on. Abortion's always a good one. Something to do with gay people, so gay marriage. A couple of years ago, gays in the military. Yeah, that's good for arguments. No one will agree on that. Not saying these aren't important issues of themselves, but I think you get my point here. If you're at the top wanting to manage things, have people argue on things that they'll never be able to resolve. Next slide. So yeah, basically we have a 4-class society. It's always been that way. You have the owner class, you have the managers, you have the worker bees, and you have the expendables. Expendables could drop dead, no one would care, except for the fact that they're really great because they keep the worker bees kind of on edge. George Carlin does this much better than I ever did, and he explained it extremely well. But disclosure will happen in this context, and ask yourself, will disclosure end this? Next slide. Well, that's basically the question. Will such inequality and social stratification melt away in a post-disclosure world? I don't have the answer. I suspect, though, not right away, if at all. Next slide. And then there's other problems. There's a lot of people on this world, and some people say, well, that's not an issue. You could take every person on planet Earth and stand them shoulder to shoulder, and they all fit in the state of Connecticut. And I guess that's true, but that's kind of missing the point, because people do like resources. We like to eat things, and we like to eat food and fish and, drive our vehicles and do all of our things. So that's a chart of human population. You've seen this a million times. Nothing can do this forever. I don't care what you're talking about. Nothing can go like that forever. At some point, just like the song says, something's got to give. Next slide. Global eco-disasters. We're going to be dealing with the results of those for many, many years. Next slide. Water. I'll get into that now. Water is a real problem. Next slide. This is a picture of the Aral Sea. What is the Aral Sea, you might ask? Next slide. That was the Aral Sea. It's in Russia. That was the Aral Sea about 25 years ago, and on the right is the Aral Sea just a couple of years ago. It was the 4th largest body of fresh water in the world once upon a time. And due to gross, incomprehensibly criminal human mismanagement, there it goes. Next slide. Deforestation, of course, we all know this is a big problem. Hit that slide, please. All in the search of the perfect hamburger is what that's all about. Next. Coral bleaching, if you don't know about this, it's scary. You'll lose sleep over it. Basically, it's a tremendous damage to the ocean's fundamental ecosystem infrastructure, and it can get really, really bad. Next slide. Overfishing. This has nothing to do with energy. This has nothing to do with pollution. This is just human beings running around the world like termites, eating everything up. There's 7 billion of us, after all, and we're now at the point where almost 3/4 of the world's fish species are either fully exploited or depleted, and fish stocks are collapsing worldwide. This is a serious problem. Disclosure, again, happens in the context of these types of problems. Next slide. We're almost done here with this whole kind of a downer, I realize. Species extinction. Unless anything changes rapidly, you could say goodbye to all of these species in the next century and many, many others. We're in massive species extinction wave right now. Next slide. And the food crisis. All of these are interrelated, obviously. Food prices spiking. 1 billion people are going to go to bed hungry tonight. Depletion of water. Oil is a big part of this. GM crops now, they're getting into the mix. You can't leave them out. They want to create super weeds, which they're doing wonderfully, which are ruining agriculture in much of the world. Colony collapse disorder. All of these are interrelated, all of it. Hit the next slide, because this is important. And this is why all of this matters, because the global demand for food is going to double. It's expected to double in the next 50 years. Ask yourself, how the hell are we going to do that? How is that supposed to happen? It's not going to happen. Thank you. Nuclear issues. Next. It's just, more depressing stuff. And the global financial crisis. You can hit that, please. There's the flame. There goes the dollar. There goes the euro. What's next? So, okay, enough of that. Now let's go back to disclosure. Political choices. Back to being the president. You're the president. So here's what's going to happen. This I really think I'm right on. President is going to have a moment. Now, the president may well make the wrong choice, but there's going to be a battle out on the open, and the battle is going to be between the people, that's us, and those people who have quietly been managing this problem the best they can. We can call them the breakaway civilization or the secret keepers or whoever. And the president, who we all know was put into power by, whether it's David Rockefeller or his minions or those people, the breakaway people, they're all the same, is going to have to decide. It's the moment of truth. And he or she may make that wrong decision and side with them. It's probably the case, but there's always a chance that someone can try to be a hero and side with the people. And if the president were to do the right thing and side with the people, what would that president do? Next slide. This is my suggestion, all right? Because disclosure is an opportunity. It's an opportunity truly to create the world that we know we want, the world that we know we should have. Reclaim, now hear me out, full constitutional authority in the name of the people, and I mean against the black budget society that is essentially lawless, that is privatized, that has run away with this technology and is answerable to no one. Creating a new formalized structure of power that needs to be in place to meet this challenge. Let's call it a global federalism. 200 plus years ago, when the United States was new, we started out with a confederacy, if you remember, the Articles of Confederation. And it didn't work very well. And the reason it didn't work well is because all of those states wanted their independence from each other. They had their own currency, they had their own taxation policies, they had their own foreign policy, they had their own tariff policy. Massachusetts had a tariff, Rhode Island didn't. So there goes Massachusetts' tariff, because you just go into Rhode Island, and, Massachusetts gets screwed. Nothing was working. They were ripe to be plucked off by powerful European forces, militaries. It was going to collapse. And what did we end up with? We ended up with really the most brilliant political compromises and vision that would have been possible. We created a federalized structure that really did create a wonderful system of checks and balances. And it worked for a while. Of course, they forgot about slavery. There was a little bit of an oversight there. But otherwise, it was a pretty good deal, and it worked pretty well. And if you look at the world around us now, I mean, yesterday, I think Danny Sheehan said a phrase that I would not have ever said, and I think it was I would say it was a slightly unfortunate phrase, which was relinquishing sovereignty. We have to relinquish sovereignty. That's really a bad thing to say in any situation, and I'm not saying that. But I do think that we've gone through a transformation since the 1980s, and it's the globalist transformation. You don't have to like it, but it's here, that's it. The only question about globalism is, will it look like freedom or will it look like fascism? That is the only question. Globalism has been happening for 500 years since Columbus set his foot on the New World. That's it. You can't get around it. Everyone's tied together. So we have to deal with that. So we need to have a global system that's actually intelligent, that makes sense, that holds transnational corporate power and transnational wealth to some kind of law. And we don't really have that, because we don't really have an intelligent global system in place. What we have is a global system that's basically run by a couple of plutocrats, so they can buy up all the water and all of the mineral rights, all of that stuff. So it's basically just robbery. So what we need is a global system that actually is answerable to the people. How to do that, I have no idea. But I think that in a disclosure situation, there may be an opportunity for someone of vision and courage, a lot of courage, to push this through. And aside from all of the political stuff, we have to find a way to transition out of a petroleum-based society, control the proliferation of dangerous weaponry. You have to assume out of the ET technology there's a lot of dangerous weapons that can be created. Implement solutions to global environmental problems, hopefully with help from black budget/ET technologies. Won't happen overnight. It'll probably take more than a century. But I think that would be the vision. Will it really happen? Do we have the ability to make this world a better place? I'm not answering that. We'll have to leave that open. Next slide. I'm almost done here, by the way. How to do it? How to create such change? Only by a groundswell of worldwide pressure. There is no other way it's going to happen. It really it's going to take people getting angry and forcing it. Next slide, please. And I think the only thing that's going to do it is the shock of something like a disclosure that might initiate it. In the UFO field, every now and then you hear people saying, well, we're not going to get there until the ETs see that we have elevated our consciousness enough and that we're ready for them. If they're waiting for that, that will never happen. I mean, I'm serious, that will never happen, and there are people who think it will, but I think they're wrong. And all you have to do is turn on the TV and go. Jim Marrs had a great title of a book. His publisher didn't allow him to use it. He wanted to call one of his new books Zombie Nation. Zombie Nation is an inspired title. And it was his take on just how, our brains are just removed out of our heads in America today. But I think disclosure, here's something I think would happen, like many people with this reality dropped on them, I think would have a kind of existential moment in which they ask themselves, wow, there are these other beings, they're incredibly intelligent, and they have all of these capabilities. And people will ask, have I been wasting my entire life? Have I been living my life wrong? The question that Tolstoy's Ivan Ilyich asked in one of the greatest short fiction pieces of all time. Have I lived my life wrong? And I do think that a disclosure moment would force many people to reconsider that, and they just might get on board and start thinking about the world in a different way and their lives in a different way. Next slide, please. So I do think that this can help create a better world. I don't say that it will. It could create a worse world. I think we can all see that possibility, right? Around the world right now, there are all kinds of moves to control the internet more carefully, to monitor you more carefully. I mean, we're moving toward Orwell's nightmare, Orwell's dystopia, not a better world right now. But the thing is, there is this battle. It's going on right now. The internet is the great battlefield, and it's the battle between freedom and the battle of control. Those are the two forces. And I think that disclosure will energize probably both of those sides, but maybe the forces of freedom. I think we can work for a better world. Anyway, next slide. I may be an idealist, but I don't think I'm much of a utopian. Does this give us a get-out-of-jail-free card? One thing I didn't talk a lot about in this lecture is the implications of a new energy paradigm. I have discussed this elsewhere, but I just didn't do it tonight. And I probably should have. I mean, let's face it, energy is probably at the heart of this. Weaning away from petroleum is, even under the best of conditions, even with some free energy solution, will be kind of a messy process, I should think. But even with free energy, does that solve all of our problems? It would be nice to be able to heat your home for free forever with a free energy device. But we're moving into an era in which contemporary technologies are enabling everyone to be they can be kind of crazy and kind of scary. I don't know if you would trust all of your neighbors with free energy. You could make a lot of really crazy things with it. 3D printing, by the way, is on the way, and that's going to revolutionize our world. 3D printing. Is anyone familiar with this? I'm sure some people are. Yeah. Yeah, 3D printing. Think Star Trek Replicator, and you're onto it. What that's going to do, this is a little off to the side, but that's going to do to manufacturing what iPhone app, Gutenberg, I heard that, what iPhone's app developers are to the iPhone. In other words, what you're going to have are all these smart people around the world coming up with nifty inventions that anyone will be able to create. Some of it will be great, like an engine that can get 300 miles of, to a gallon of gas, or doesn't need gas. I think 3D printing actually will break the stranglehold on a lot of the suppressed technologies that have been going on for years. That's a good thing. On the other hand, there is the possibility that you could make your own fleet of drones and piss off your neighbors, or you can create other kinds of weapons of mass destruction, maybe easily. That is a concern, let's face it. So who knows how all of that will play out. Got a little off the disclosure path there, but it's just interesting to think about. So will disclosure bring the end of corporations, evil corporations? Will it bring the end of money? I have friends who think, we got to get rid of money, a moneyed economy. I can't see how that's going to happen. I don't have the vision for that, I admit. Will it end social stratification and inequality? Well, it won't if it doesn't get rid of money and corporations. Will it give us higher consciousness? We hear about this a lot, depending on how you interpret consciousness. I've never seen consciousness as a switch. Some people do, flip the right switch and turn on, and I don't know. I think of higher consciousness as a lot of hard work and meditation and dedication, but I do think that disclosure can breed higher consciousness in that regard. I do. Next slide. Maybe at least temporarily. They say shift happens. I do think, are we on a shift? Yeah, actually, I think that we are. I think 100 years from now, historians will look back on this era and they will say, this is when humanity went through its shift. I don't know if it's all going to be spiritual. A lot of people think. I think a lot of it's technological. But that will be driving changes, not just in our society, but in our physiology and our biology. If you want to look at some of the developments in biology, mapping the genome, creating cybernetic organisms, really it all could be happening before we know it. And then one of the things about 3D printing is that they're talking about 3D printing living tissue. If you want a new heart, they'll print it with your own genetic material. Isn't that nifty? Will we be creating artificial people? Or not even have to be people. They could be whatever you want to create. If you want to be a mad scientist, maybe will they be creating that? Is that what these aliens are, by the way? I've wondered this. Are they artificially created biological entities that have circuitry maybe somewhere in there, or not? You know? Next slide. Just about done. What's going to happen when we disclose? Will they announce themselves to us? See, you've gotten by now that I'm predicating disclosure not on them announcing themselves to us, but by us getting to the tipping point as a civilization in which we're able to prove that they're here. That's how I see it as the most likely way. But once we do that, will they then just say, oh, okay, well, good job, you passed the test, and we're going to be your diplomatic neighbors now? Or will they become hostile, or will they continue to be aloof? That would be a rather unsatisfying outcome, don't you think? We get disclosure, and we still don't really deal with them, at least in the way that we would like. And yet, why wouldn't that be possible? Next slide. That's one of the possible ironies of disclosure. Doesn't it seem like things just never turn out the way you want them to? Every time there's a revolution, it doesn't really turn out the way the people who start the revolution plan, really. Doesn't mean that they're all failures, by the way. You know, even if it doesn't accomplish everything you set out, sometimes there's still a good thing. I mean, aside from the bloodshed. But, you know, the revolutions don't really accomplish everything that they set out to. That's, I think, true. But there's other moments of irony. There's a possibility that whoever the secret keepers are, that they're still trying to deal with this, and they may not be up to the game. I mean, they may be struggling almost as much as we feel that we're struggling to understand this. And after disclosure, it may take us many years to understand these other beings and their agenda. And don't you think, here's an interesting thing to consider, how the debates about them will break down depending on, say, religious orientation or political orientation. So you've got, so say, Christian evangelists on the one hand, and you have tree-hugging, New Age, consciousness people on the other hand. So one side looks at these beings as demonic, Luciferian, the other as, galactic brothers and sisters. There is no bridge long enough to cover that divide. There just is not. So what will resolve that? Nothing will resolve that except generations, really. Nothing is going to resolve that. Unless somehow these other beings are able to provide some information that resolves it. So maybe they can give us proof that we consider persuasive. But in lieu of that, the arguments are going to be intense. And then you'll have the whole national security argument. Do we ramp up our space-based weapon systems and try to blast them out and defend Earth, Earthicans, from the evil aliens? Or do we try to reach out in more diplomatic ways? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how that's going to play out, but I can imagine that's going to be a very, very possible bone of contention in the future, and there'll be many others of these. That's the problem with disclosure. It is necessary. I mean, honestly, it has to be necessary if we're ever going to get past being like a bunch of 12-year-old, 13-year-old kids as a civilization. If we're going to be grown-ups ever, then I think we need to get this fundamental truth out there on the table. But I just don't think it's going to be the easiest thing to resolve right away. Kind of like being an adult, when you think about it. Next slide. Ah, yes, a century from now, trying to look ahead. What will life be like a century from now? Well, I think one fundamental thing is there will be an open acknowledgement of this reality. I think by 100 years, absolutely. But I also think that we're going to be dealing with a lot of the repercussions of our world today, environmental repercussions. I don't think we'll have cleaned up the environment by then fully. Hopefully it won't be getting worse. Human society, I think, will be very different. I think human society will be alien. I believe that, like, your great-grandchildren will be in a qualitatively different world than what we are in right now. Probably one that none of us here have even the capacity to visualize. Do you realize H.G. Wells, when he wrote the War of the Worlds, it was in 1895, Wells was a genius, really, and a visionary, and actually did accurately predict a lot of future technologies. I think there were machine guns, chemical weapons, I think, a couple of other things. But here's something he couldn't predict, and this is really ironic. The Martians who land, how do they get around on Earth? They get around on these big-ass machines that have tripods that walk. So they don't even fly. They don't even have flying saucers. They don't even have aircraft. This is 1895, less than 10 years from the Wright brothers. And Wells, as brilliant as he was, could not see controlled flight. That's amazing. So 100 years from now, I have to assume we're just not going to be able to foresee human society. I just think it's going to be so radically different. Will we just be living in virtual reality matrix environment? I do wonder that. That's one of the things I think could stop disclosure, by the way. I didn't mention this, and I didn't write about it in my book. I wish I had. But when you see all these people just zoning out into, like, it's going to be virtual reality soon with full tactile immersion. I mean, fill in the blanks here. I think we can all realize we're all going to be vacationing like every week, every chance we get. Be a lot easier to do that than hang out with the family, right, where there's real people and real problems to deal with. You already see this with video games now. It's just going to get worse. And will we do it as different biological creatures? Will there be variations of humanity? We've mapped the human genome. But I do think there'll be an open acknowledgement of these other beings. I'm afraid it'll come as a denouement. That's actually, all these years I spent on this topic, and I wonder if the open acknowledgement of UFOs will be kind of like, oh yeah, that too. Let's play another game. You know, will it be like that? So I think some of the questions that we have will be answered, but I feel that we can confidently say there'll be many new questions and new issues, new problems. I think the fundamental problem of being human will probably not go away. Even if people want to become immortal, which some people want to do, you know, snip the aging chromosome or gene or whatever. But we're still going to be mortal people, and we're still going to have all of the psychological problems that make us what we are. So there'll be new problems. Next slide. Ah, yes. So this is my website. This is going to be my new website, richarddolanpress.com. As Grant mentioned in the last lecture, I am the publisher of his new book. I've got, in addition to my own new book, can you hit the next button? The next slide, I mean. I've got this book coming out in about 2 months, UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, Understanding an Ancient Phenomenon in a New Era. It's basically a new introduction to the field. It's a new primer, which I think the field desperately needs. I try to approach this topic with as fresh an approach as a fresh take as I can. And so that book will be out in a few months. But I'm publishing a bunch of other books by a number of other fascinating, brilliant people, I'm proud to say. And so I'm creating richarddolanpress.com. I'm just renaming it all. On that site, articles and videos and all of that stuff. So that's it. Thank you very much. I don't know how late it is. Sorry. It's 11:15. I did start late in my defense. I did start late. I hope to see all of you tomorrow. It's probably too late for questions, I'm thinking, so we'll just do it all tomorrow. See you then. Bye.